The night air had a sharp bite to it, the last traces of daylight slipping away behind the rooftops as I wandered past the neat rows of houses in this quiet part of West London. Another grueling shift at the local health food store was finally behind me, serving the wealthy, the elderly, and the downright eccentric who could afford to live around here. As I meandered through the familiar streets, my mind drifted along with me, letting my feet instinctively carry me back to my rundown apartment. I mulled over what little food I had left in the fridge, wondered what my girlfriend was up to, and considered my weekend plans when something ahead pulled my focus. Right there on the sidewalk, not far from my building, was a large, dark shape. The dim, flickering streetlights barely cast enough glow to make out its details. At first, I thought it might be a fox curled up for the night, its triangular ears giving it away. But as I moved closer, I realized it was completely still. My curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped up to inspect it. It was a head, a demon's head, chiseled from stone. Its sharp, angular features tapered to a narrow chin that curved into a wide, unsettling grin. Deep-set eyes carved into the rock were filled with shadows, giving them a hollow, empty stare. Two thick horns jutted from its temples, casting long, claw-like shapes across the pavement. It reminded me of a gargoyle, ancient and worn, as if it had spent centuries exposed to the elements. Everything about its design seemed meant to unnerve. A flood of questions rushed through my head. Where had this thing come from? If it was part of a church's architecture, why was it abandoned here? And if it wasn't from a church, then what kind of place had it come from? Why had someone left it lying in the open? The more I thought about it, the more the mystery pulled me in. A sudden gust of cold air snapped me back to reality. I had lost track of time. The streets around me were empty, silent. I looked at the head, then at my apartment building just a short walk away. At the very least, I reasoned, this thing might be worth something. With that, I grabbed it by the horns and carried it toward my building. Regret hit me almost instantly when I stepped inside and saw the out-of-order sign taped to the elevator doors. Just my luck. Gritting my teeth, I started the long haul up 7 flights of stairs, the weight of the stone head seeming to double with each step. By the time I reached my door, sweat clung to my shirt. As I fumbled with my keys, I heard the familiar sounds of my girlfriend, Emily, moving around in the kitchen. "I'm home," I called out, dropping the demon's head onto the floor with a heavy thud. "Dinner's almost ready," she called back, the scent of seasoned chicken filling the air. I used up the rest of the roast chicken we had. Hopefully, it's not too dry. She stepped around the corner to greet me but froze mid-step. Her face twisted into an expression of pure disgust as her eyes landed on the stone head. "What is that?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I found it just up the road," I said, caught off guard by her immediate disapproval. "It was just sitting there in the open." She met my gaze, her brows furrowing. "It's demonic," she said flatly. "I want it out of here." Emily had always been the more grounded and responsible one between us. She wasn't particularly religious, but she had been raised in a Christian household, and I figured some of those values had stuck with her. "I think it's just a gargoyle's head," I countered, gesturing toward it. "Isn't it kind of interesting? There's got to be some story behind it. And come on, it's just a chunk of stone. It's not going to hurt you." I tried to lighten the mood with a grin. Her arms crossed. "Well, someone must have thrown it out for a reason, and I am going to give you one too," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "I do not want it here," I sighed, exhaustion weighing down on me after a long day. "It's staying here tonight," I said, rubbing a hand over my face. "I am not dragging it back down those stairs right now. Besides, it could be worth something. We could use the extra cash." That was not the answer she wanted to hear. Hoping to diffuse the tension, I turned my attention to dinner, but even that didn't go my way. Of all nights, the television decided to stop working, so we ate in near silence. Sitting at our small kitchen table, I found my gaze wandering down the hallway, back to the demon's head. The way the shadows pooled in its eyes made it look like it was staring right at me, its stone mouth frozen in that eerie, knowing grin. Amber and I turned in early that night, and I was more than ready to let sleep take me after the long, frustrating day. But my rest was abruptly stolen when I was jolted awake by the piercing sound of a woman screaming. It wasn't the usual rowdy laughter of drunk partygoers stumbling home at this hour. This was different. It was raw, desperate. I climbed out of bed and shuffled to the window, scanning the street below. At first, I saw nothing but empty pavement. But then another sharp cry led my eyes to the source of the noise. A lone fox stood frozen, its head tilted back, wailing into the night, right at the spot where I had found the demon's head. A shiver crawled down my spine. It was strange. Foxes didn't normally behave like this outside of mating season. My mind briefly flickered back to that eerie, grinning stone face. Just a coincidence, I reassured myself. I sighed and turned back toward bed, catching a glimpse of the alarm clock. 3:33 a.m., the so-called witching hour. I almost laughed. It felt like the universe was throwing every creepy cliché at me tonight, trying to spook me into believing some childhood horror story about shadows lurking in the dark or monsters under the bed. Nice try, I muttered under my breath, shaking my head. I nearly managed to brush off the unease when I saw Amber's eyes, wide open, locked onto mine. She looked terrified, her whole body trembling slightly. I immediately thought of her sleep paralysis, something she suffered from often, but I'd never seen her eyes this open before, so full of fear. "Amber," I whispered, reaching out to gently shake her shoulder. The moment my fingers touched her skin, she shot up with a blood-curdling scream, as if I had electrocuted her. Took me a moment to calm her down. "Did you have a nightmare?" I asked, brushing a hand through her hair. She pushed my hand away. "I dreamed you came into the room, or at least I thought it was you," she muttered, looking away. "But instead of your face, it was that damned demon's head. It was standing there, laughing at me." Then it lunged to grab my... Her hand instinctively touched the spot on her shoulder where I had tried to wake her. She let out a deep sigh and turned away from me. "I just need sleep." I didn't push the subject, knowing it would only rekindle our earlier argument. I laid down beside her, but the encounter left a lingering unease in my chest. I felt stupid for letting it get to me, but no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the thought that there was something truly wrong about that demon's head. My mind fought to dismiss it as coincidence. Amber's dream had probably just planted the idea of evil in my subconscious. But despite my best efforts, the feeling gnawed at me, persistent and unshakable. Sleep was out of the question. Frustrated, I threw off the covers and got up. With the TV out of commission, I grabbed my book from the bedside table and headed to the kitchen. I flipped on the small sideboard lamp and tried to focus on reading, but my eyes kept drifting toward the dark outline at the end of the hallway. The demon's head. Its shadowed grin seemed even more pronounced in the dim lighting. "Screw this," I muttered, putting down my book. I grabbed the head and set it on the kitchen table in front of me, determined to examine it closer. I studied its features, now with a growing sense of resentment. Never had a simple object caused me so much unnecessary grief in such a short time. Yet, as I stared into those hollow eye sockets, the questions that had first intrigued me surfaced again. "Where did you come from?" I wondered aloud. Lifting the head, I ran my fingers over the back. Surprisingly smooth. Turning it in my hands, I noticed something odd. There were no cracks, no breaks, nothing to suggest it had ever been attached to a structure. This wasn't part of a gargoyle. Then I examined its face again. The craftsmanship was disturbingly lifelike. The textured stone mimicked aged, weathered skin, complete with wrinkles etched into its forehead and around its eyes. Then a putrid stench hit me like a slap to the face. A sickening mix of sulfur and decay. My nose wrinkled in disgust. The smell must have been masked by dinner earlier, but now it was unbearable. I leaned in to pinpoint the source and realized the stench was coming from inside the eye sockets. Frowning, I turned the head toward the lamp to get a better look, but no matter how I adjusted it, the deepest parts remained shrouded in darkness. Irritated, I reached a finger inside, probing the hollow space. Just as my fingertip reached the depths, a sharp, searing pain shot through my hand. I yanked my hand back instinctively, cradling my finger as a bead of blood welled up from a fresh wound. My breath hitched as I stared at the demon's eye socket. A single droplet of crimson slid out, like a tear rolling down its stone cheek. Though the cut was small, a deep throbbing spread through my hand. Panic flared in my mind. What if I had been pricked by something infected? My thoughts raced with images of rusted nails and contaminated needles. Without wasting a second, I rushed to the sink, scrubbing my wound under scalding water before dousing it in the last of our vodka. I pressed a bandage over the cut and slumped onto the couch, utterly drained. The moment my head hit the armrest, exhaustion crashed over me like a wave. My concerns, my fears, they no longer mattered. A drowsiness unlike any I had ever felt before overtook me, and before I could fight it, darkness swallowed me whole. Light crept into my sand-crusted eyes as they slowly opened to a bright room. I saw Amber peering into the kitchen mirror, fastening her earrings. "What time is it?" I croaked, not wanting to lift my head from the post-wake comfort. 1 p.m. "I'm about to go to work," she said, adjusting the last clasp on her right ear. "Why did you sleep on the sofa last night?" She glanced at me sideways. "I was investigating the demon's head again. Guess it must have put a spell on me before I could reach the bedroom," I joked lightheartedly. Amber turned, her expression flat. "Well, I'm glad you got some good rest. I slept awfully last night." Her eyes flicked to the demon's head still sitting on the kitchen table. "I want that gone today. I'm not sleeping another night with that thing in our home." "Seriously, Amber?" I replied, irritation flaring in my voice. "Don't you think you're being a little childish?" "I'm serious." She turned toward the hallway. "Also, it stinks in here. Something must have gone off." Before I could reply, she was already slipping out the door, leaving me alone with the thing. Dejected, I dragged myself off the sofa. Thank God it was my day off. I peered down at the demon's head. Fine. If she wanted me to get rid of it, I'd at least make it look like I was trying. I grabbed my phone, snapped a couple of pictures, and listed it on Facebook Marketplace as Gothic Stone Demon's Head. I set the price at £100, probably undervalued, but I didn't care. As I posted it, my gaze drifted to my finger, where the plaster covered last night's cut. The bandage had darkened. Peeling it back, I saw that while the bleeding had stopped, something had spread beneath the skin. Thin black lines, like ink seeping through damp paper. The veins looked bruised, almost corrupted. Yet, the pain was gone. Before I could process the unease rising in my chest, my phone buzzed. Someone had responded to my listing. I hadn't expected interest so soon and almost ignored it. But then I saw the message, "You have what is mine." It came from an account with no profile picture, the name simply Olga. I hesitated before typing, "You want to buy it?" A reply came instantly, "You have what is mine. It must be returned to me." A strange feeling crawled up my spine. I have no way of confirming that. "Are you going to pay for it?" The typing bubbles flickered on and off before a single word appeared. "Yes." I sighed, giving her my apartment block's location. The response was immediate. "I will be there in 10 minutes. That was unsettlingly fast. I sat down at the kitchen table, resting before hauling the head downstairs. In the daylight, I could finally see into the demon's eye sockets. They were just hollow spaces, smooth stone all the way through. No sign of anything sharp, no hidden barbs or edges. Then what had cut me last night? Before I could investigate further, my phone buzzed again. Olga had arrived. "Time to go," I muttered, gripping the demon's horns. The head felt heavier than before. Each step down the stairwell tested my balance, and with each footfall, a nagging voice in my mind whispered, "Take it back upstairs. Keep it a little longer." I pushed forward, exiting onto the street. Scanning my surroundings, I spotted her immediately. She stood by a lamppost, a peculiar old woman swathed in black fabric, safety pins of various sizes holding everything together. Her long, straight black hat sat atop what resembled an old judge's wig, or, on closer inspection, rolled up bits of wool, also pinned in place. If anyone were to own the demon's head, it would be her. Her dark, round spectacles locked onto the object in my hands, and she shuffled toward me with uncanny urgency. "Come, come," she rasped, her vaguely Eastern European accent difficult to place. "Give him back to me." She reached for the head, but something inside me resisted. My grip tightened. Instinctively, I pulled it away. "You must be Olga," I said, though the answer was obvious. "Are you deaf?" she snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Give him back to me." "Fine, but be careful, it's heavy." I barely extended my arms before she snatched it from my grasp, lifting it effortlessly as if it weighed nothing. She turned it over in her hands, her bony fingers tracing its rough surface, muttering under her breath. "Naughty, naughty thing." She chided the head like a disobedient child. "I turn my back for one moment, and you run?" She stopped, her gaze plunging into the empty sockets. A flicker of something, anger, maybe fear, flashed across her face as she turned her piercing eyes on me. "How long have you had this?" "Just since yesterday," I said, suddenly aware of the dryness in my throat. Despite her small frame, the woman exuded an unnerving intensity. Without warning, she grabbed my arm, yanking up my sleeve. "Hey, what the hell?" I protested, but she flipped my hand over, her fingers like iron. I hadn't checked my finger since coming outside, but the sight of it made my stomach lurch. The dark sprawl had expanded, its inky tendrils creeping past my palm, slithering towards my wrist like spreading roots. "The mark of corruption," she murmured, her grip tightening. "You must come with me. Now." She scooped up the head, holding it like some sacred artifact. "What? No, I need to get to a hospital. This wasn't here 10 minutes ago," I said, staring at the black veins pulsating beneath my skin. "He knows you're trying to rid yourself of him. He's accelerating the process." She nodded toward the street. "Come. My home is not far." "Whose influence are you talking about?" I demanded, still clutching my wrist. "The more you argue, the less time you have," she warned, already walking. "And besides, don't you still want your 100 pounds? Her smirk was oddly out of place, but she didn't look back to see my reaction. I hesitated. Everything in me screamed to call a cab and go straight to the ER. But something deeper, something primal, kept my feet moving. I followed her, ignoring the confused glances of passersby as we wound through quiet streets toward an aging residential block. Breaking the silence, I asked, "Are you going to tell me what's actually going on?" She turned her head slightly, regarding me from behind her round, dark lenses. "Do you believe in absolute good and evil?" I frowned. "I don't think so. Everything's relative." She clicked her tongue in disapproval. "Young people," she muttered. "Nothing is sacred to you." She patted the head as if it were a living thing. "This is evil. It thrives in the shadows of ignorance, luring fools into its grasp. You'll swear there's nothing to fear until you're drowning in its darkness." I glanced down at my hand. My index finger had turned completely black, and the creeping stain was inching up my forearm. My pulse quickened. "Is this going to take long?" I asked, barely hiding my panic. "I really think I need medical help." "Fool!" she spat, shaking her head. "You do not listen. But no matter. We are here." I expected a church, maybe some abandoned monastery, but instead, we stood before a weathered, whitewashed house, barely distinguishable from the others on the block, except for its neglected yard and the oppressive air surrounding it. She gestured for me to follow, stepping inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. The hallway was dim, lined with crimson damask wallpaper that drank the light from the small gold chandeliers above. Rooms branched off, their shelves crammed with a bizarre assortment of objects. Dusty jars with indistinct contents, statues that seemed to watch me, old leather-bound tomes whose spines were cracked with age. "What is all this?" I asked, eyeing an ornate chalice that looked older than civilization itself. "Relics, artifacts, tools." She waved a dismissive hand. "Some bring protection, most bring ruin. I am their keeper." She led me into a room that, compared to the rest of the house, was almost ordinary. Lined with bookshelves, but relatively uncluttered. A lone pedestal stood against the wall, waiting. She placed the demon's head upon it with a strange reverence. "So let me get this straight," I said, trying to sound like I wasn't losing my mind. "Some ancient sorcerer carved a demon's head, filled it with evil magic, and now it's cursing people?" She turned to me, lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You think this was carved?" She scoffed. "Oh, child, if only it were that simple. Someone carving this monster?" Olga scoffed, shaking her head. "No, you foolish boy. This is a petrified skull." Her words hit me like a brick. She actually believed this thing was real. I felt my stomach churn as my eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign that this was some elaborate prank. Hidden cameras, a smirk, anything. But then I looked down at my hand. It was completely black now. "What is this thing doing to me?" My voice cracked, fear creeping in like a slow tide. "He's trying to claim you," Olga said matter-of-factly as she skimmed the bookshelves. "Your blood gave him passage. Now he's spreading, weaving himself into your soul, molding you into a new vessel." I swallowed hard. "Then why not just destroy it?" "You can't kill a demon," she said, pulling out a thick, weathered book. "His soul would just find another host." She flipped through brittle pages filled with ornate calligraphy, the letters twisting into strange shapes. Creatures, symbols, faces that seemed almost alive. Long ago, someone managed to destroy his body but trap his essence inside its own skull. That lump of stone is the only thing keeping him contained. As she read, I stole another glance at the demon's head. The empty sockets seemed deeper than before, swirling with shifting shadows. A dull ache spread through my skull, creeping behind my eyes. "Ah, there it is," Olga muttered, retrieving a small, carved wooden box from a shelf. She opened it, revealing a short, ornate dagger. The handle was covered in intricate inscriptions in a language I didn't recognize. "I need a drop of your blood," she said, stepping closer. I hesitated but finally held out my left hand, the one that was still clean. She pricked my fingertip with the dagger, letting a single drop fall onto a thick parchment she had pulled from a leather folder. "Now, I must prepare the sigil," she murmured, dipping a feathered pen into an inkwell and carefully inscribing symbols around the bloody print. As she worked, a single thought slithered into my mind. Kill her. The idea repulsed me, but the feeling remained. The certainty of it. The need. She's lying. She tricked you. She wants to take what is rightfully yours. Amber, she doubted you too. She tried to get rid of it. Get rid of her. My breath caught in my throat. No, what the hell was I thinking? Amber was the love of my life. But the thoughts weren't stopping. My fingers curled around something cold. I looked down. The dagger was in my blackened hand. The darkness had crept past my elbow now. My arm moved on its own, raising the knife. The demon's grin seemed to widen, baring its jagged teeth. "Do it. Kill her." I fought back, my untainted arm straining against the other, shaking violently as the dagger inched toward Olga. The pressure was unbearable, like my own body was tearing itself apart. Then Olga turned, sigil in hand. "You may be deaf, but are you blind to the evil before you?" "No," I gasped, my voice raw. "I see now." She held the sigil over my cursed hand and began to chant in a language I didn't understand. The parchment glowed. A searing pain shot through me. Felt like my bones were turning to molten iron. I screamed, the knife clattering to the floor. The parchment in Olga's hands caught fire, the flames creeping toward my name. And then I saw it. A black, oily tendril slithered out of my fingertip, writhing through the air like a living thing. It moved toward the demon's skull, pulled by some unseen force. The pain intensified, as if my veins were being yanked from my body. My vision blurred. Shadows twisted and convulsed within the demon's sockets. The grin faltered, twisting into a grimace. The last of the darkness drained from my body, sucked back into the stone. The sigil burst into embers. My vision tunneled. Then nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on a burgundy recliner. My head pounded. I scanned the room, taking in Gothic paintings of saints, demons, and figures that seemed caught between the two. A faint scratching sound caught my attention. Olga sat at a massive mahogany desk, inscribing something onto an old scroll. "You're awake," she said without turning. "Am I?" I muttered. "This still feels like a dream." She put down her pen and finally looked at me. "You danced with the devil today. How did it feel?" My mind reeled. I wanted to find some rational explanation, some way to tell myself this was just hysteria. But I couldn't. "It was terrifying," I admitted. "I wanted to kill you. I wanted to kill Amber. I've never had thoughts like that before." I put my head in my hands, my chest tightening with shame. Olga turned back to her scroll, unimpressed. "And do you see no good in this?" "No." "Of course not." I shot up from my seat. "It was pure evil." She finally nodded. "Good. Then you are awake." She gestured to a small white envelope on the table. "Your £100 is in there. Take it and go. The demon's hold on you is gone." I hesitated. "I can't take that. You saved my life." She waved a dismissive hand. "No, boy. I saved your soul. If you won't take the money, then swear to me. If this head ever finds you again, or anyone you know, you'll return it to me." "Of course," I said. "I swear." She didn't say another word, just flicked her fingers toward the door. I left without another glance at the demon's head, and prayed I'd never see it again. "Now leave," Olga said curtly, her voice sharp as iron. "You've taken enough of my time." I hesitated, lingering just long enough to nod in gratitude before stepping past the towering shelves of relics and oddities. The weight of the encounter pressed heavy on my shoulders as I exited through the front door, stepping into the quiet night. A small part of me still clung to the hope that this had all been some elaborate prank, that cameras would pop out from behind hedges, that friends or family would emerge laughing, shaking their heads at how easily I had been fooled. But no such moment came. The street was silent, the world unchanged, indifferent to the chaos that had just unraveled before me. I walked, trying to ground myself in the familiar, but everything felt slightly off. The people I passed on the sidewalk, just regular pedestrians going about their lives, seemed shadowed by something sinister, their faces unreadable in a way I had never noticed before. Every dark alley felt deeper, every streetlight barely keeping the encroaching night at bay. It was as if I had stepped out of one reality and into another, where the world looked the same but had lost its warmth. I felt unmoored, as if I had slipped into a liminal space between sanity and revelation. By some miracle, my feet carried me home. My apartment building stood as unremarkable as ever, yet its presence filled me with a kind of relief I hadn't known I needed. The elevator, once deemed out of order, was miraculously working again. A sign, maybe, that not everything had fallen into disorder. I forced a small laugh as I stepped inside, clinging to anything that felt normal. As I rode up, my thoughts turned to Amber. Would I tell her what had happened? No, of course not. How could I? She'd think I was either lying or insane. I had no proof, no evidence, only my own terrifying recollections. And then it hit me like a gut punch. I would never be able to talk about this to anyone. Not to friends, not to family. This experience would live only in my mind. A terrible secret I would have to carry alone. How many others had gone through something like this? How many others had seen past the veil, only to be silenced by the impossibility of their own truth? The elevator doors slid open, and I stepped out into the dim hallway. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before unlocking the door to my apartment. The sound of the television murmured from the living room. Something familiar, something good. I clung to it like a lifeline. "I'm home," I called out, my voice surprisingly steady despite the storm inside me. From the other room, I heard Amber's delighted squeal before she bounded into view, her pajama-clad form launching into my arms. The warmth of her embrace, the scent of her hair. It was enough to remind me, even for just a second, that the world still held light. "I'm sorry for being so cold about that gargoyle head," she murmured, her hands resting on my shoulders. Work's been a nightmare lately, and I took it out on you. It was just bad timing to bring something like that home. I'm really sorry. I pulled her closer, willing myself to hold back the tears that threatened to rise. Don't apologize, I whispered. You were right. That thing was evil. I got rid of it. She leaned back slightly, her brow furrowing with amusement. Whoa, what happened to it's just a lump of stone, she teased. But then, as she studied my face, her expression softened with concern. Are you okay? I forced a small smile. I'm fine, Elite. It's just been a long day. I love you, Amber. She smiled back, pressing a gentle kiss to my cheek. I love you too, baby. Now come on, let's be lazy tonight. The TV's working again, and I'm ordering us dinner. She led me to the couch, blissfully unaware of the war still raging inside me. Without knowing it, she had become my tether to reality, my anchor in the storm. In the days that followed, I tried, desperately, to forget what had happened, to bury it under the mundane distractions of daily life. But no matter how hard I tried, the memory clung to me like a shadow. Every so often, the horror would come rushing back, the knowledge of what lurked just beyond human perception. It haunted me in the small hours of the night, whispering its presence through the eerie screams of a fox outside my window. Always at 3:33 a.m.